good morning, Bruce. Mr. Firestone, how are you doing this morning?
I'm excellent, Sebastian. I'm so glad to be here with you.
And I appreciate you accepting my invitation. I was looking forward to this interview with you. Uh, we've had many talks, you and I, about real estate and
We sure
hockey
have.
over the years. I've listened to a lot of your podcast and training sessions, and I really appreciate you taking a few minutes with me this morning.
No problem. I'm glad to do it.
And instead of me introducing you, because your resume is quite lengthy, Prof. Bruce, so you and I, as I said, have had many discussions. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background? And for those of the very few of us who don't know you yet, I come from Ottawa, so I have the privilege of having seen everything
Yeah.
you've done. But some people from BC or other areas in the country may not. So I'll let you go ahead and introduce
Yeah.
yourself.
Well, I got my civil engineering degree from McGill University in Montreal, and I applied to go to university quite young, Sebastian. I was 14 when I applied and turned 15 when I got there. And then when I graduated, I was 19 and I applied to ESSO to get a job. You know, as a young man, I wanted to find a job. And I went through a series of interviews with the chief engineer being the last one. And he says, "Oh, Mr. Firestone, reading my resume, he said, there's a problem with your CV." And I went, oh my gosh. That's a very serious issue if your CV is not accurate. And he said, it looks like your date of birth says you're 19. And I said, well, no, that is correct. Well, he said, we can't hire you until you turn 21, because back then the age of majority in Quebec and in the rest of Canada was 21. And he said, come back in 15 months. We'll be happy to hire you. But Sebastian and I had a young girlfriend who later became my wife. And, I wanted to get married. I wanted to have some children. I wanted to get a job, of course, and support my family. And I said, well, I don't think that's going to work. And so I looked around the world, and Australia had just changed their age of majority from 21 to 18. 3 weeks later, I was on a plane with my girlfriend to Sydney, Australia, and I got a job there as a young engineer. And while I was there, I got a master's degree in engineering science from the University of New South Wales in Sydney. And then I got invited to do some teaching and research at the Australian National University in Canberra. And by the way, Canberra is the most boring city in the world. It's a government town. I mean, it makes Ottawa look like Paris. So anyway, I went to the Australian National University with my young family and started to do some research and teaching. And I eventually got a PhD in urban economics. And I was on track, to become a university professor. And then my dad, who was living in Canada, in Ottawa, in fact, came to see us for a few weeks, and he said, "Bruce, could you just come back to Canada for 6 months and help me out?" His business wasn't doing very well. Well, that was 1983. Here I am, over 40 years later, still in Ottawa. And in that time, I've been a developer. I built probably 2,000 homes, dozens of office buildings and shopping plazas. I've been a hockey guy. Helped build the Canadian Tire Center where the Ottawa Senators play. Then I was a university professor again. And now my last act is I do some realtor work, and I'm also a business and real estate investment coach.
Well, thank you. And that's very nutshell because we could have talked about just your background and resume for about 6 hours. It's a
Oh
very
no, you
amazing
don't want to do
story.
that. Everybody would tune out.
I don't think so, Bruce. I don't think so. You've done so many great things. So essentially, I mean, this is a real estate podcast, and I want to ask you, when exactly did you start doing real estate? In what capacity, as an agent or developer? When did you start doing that, and how in the process?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what happened. So I've been doing real estate in one form or another, teaching it, practicing it, realtor work, developer. I mean, since 1983. And so when I came back to Canada, to Ottawa, I found that my dad had invested in roller disco rinks. I bet you none of your podcast listeners or viewers are going to know what a roller disco rink is, but
Some of them will. Some of them will, Bruce.
yeah, I can't believe it, but I didn't know what they were. And in fact, I don't remember any disco music living. I lived in Australia for 11 or 12 years. and I don't remember any disco music. So I come back to Ottawa, and my dad, with I think 3 other partners, owns 6 roller disco rinks. And I didn't know anything about it, so I went to visit one of those rinks, Sebastian. And I rented roller skates, and I didn't know. So with the disco ball and the disco music, you skate in one direction like this, clockwise. They stop the music, and everybody stops. So I stopped, and then they start the music again, and you go in the opposite direction. Now, after about an hour of this, I thought, this is really dumb. This is just the worst ever. I can't believe my dad is invested in roller disco rinks. So the next day, I went to see my dad's partners, and I said, I will give you our 50% ownership in the operating business if you give me the 50% in the real estate, right? So you have the real estate here, then you have the operating business. They're 2 different entities. And the 3 men, who were quite a bit older than me, I was in my 20s then, said, "Oh, Bruce, we would be taking advantage of you. The roller disco business is a cash cow. We don't want to take advantage." I said, "It's okay. You keep the cow. I'll take the real estate." And they said, "Real estate's very boring, Bruce. You don't want to do that." I said, "No, no, it really is okay." So we made that deal. 18 months later, Sebastian, roller disco died. You couldn't pay a teenager to go to the roller disco rink. You couldn't pay them. It was empty. And the poor guys, they did go bankrupt. So I ended up with 6 empty, huge 45,000 square foot warehouse buildings, which were completely empty. And everybody was freaking out except for me. Because that was the beginning of the tech industry, really the real beginning of the tech industry in Ottawa, other than Northern Electric or Nortel. And
What year is this, Bruce? Is this in the 80s or early 90s?
it would have been 84 probably, or 85.
Okay.
And so I had these 6 humongous, think about it, 45,000 square foot warehouse buildings in really good locations with 20-foot clear height ceilings, completely empty. And it turned out that tech businesses back then, there was a thing going on. It was called management by wandering around, MBWA. It was like a management fad. It was actually quite a good fad, I thought, in the sense that the idea was that, Sebastian, you as my boss, for example, could wander around the entire building, and you could see your tech, your coders, you could see your marketing people, you could see your financial people, your accounting people. They would all be there. And the idea is that the most valuable interactions that you will have are called collisionable hours, right? Collisionable hours means just like you and I meet at the water cooler and you say, "Oh, Bruce, I meant to ask you this question." So it's a little bit like about inspiration and creativity. And that's why I think a lot of people want to call their employees back to the office today, Sebastian, because
Absolutely.
if you and I were working 10 feet apart, we can yell at each other and spark off of each other, right? So
We missed that. We
within a
missed that.
within a year, I had rented 6 of these big empty warehouses to these wonderful tech companies paying ridiculously high rents. And then because the income was so much higher, I was able to refinance, and I took out about $7 million from a new mortgage, tax free. And I thought, oh, this real estate thing is great. I like this. $7 million in tax free. And back then the money was, very plentiful. And so that got me started in real estate.
It's amazing. So essentially, you started as a developer or investor, and
Mhm.
then turned this into a leasing aspect of things, and then you kept doing commercial real estate ever since, right?
And we did, like I said, we did many subdivisions. We built 2,000 houses, office buildings, shopping plazas, an arena. I mean, we did a lot of different stuff.
That's amazing. And you know what? I always found that there was a lot of similarities because we're going to jump into some hockey stuff as well here. I can't just get past that. But I read your book twice. It's called Don't Back Down,
Right.
and I have a hard copy with me. But so just so everyone knows here online, Bruce has offered us a free copy on Dropbox of anyone, and I will share the link when I post the podcast. And it's very generous of you. I wasn't expecting that this morning. but I read this book, and what this reminds me is that there's a lot of similarities between professional sports
Oh,
and high level real estate.
yeah.
And can you talk to me about this? I mean, I know this NHL project came about probably in the late 80s, early 90s in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Tell me how this synchronizes together, real estate and sports, and how you got this NHL project off the ground.
Right. So, Sebastian, I've always been a very big believer, whether you're a realtor or you're a developer or you're a tech company, to have significant differentiated value. That if you're a realtor and if you just say, I do everything as a realtor, it's pretty hard for people to know. Does Sebastian do residential? Does he do high-end residential? Does he do cottage property? Does he do farm property? Can he help me with a commercial lease? You know, can he help me find a piece of land to build a new office building or industrial building on? I mean, I think it's very difficult in today's economy to be all things to all people. So back in 1987, um, I wanted to differentiate our company from other real estate companies. And I did some of that by going what I call under the market. So we were the biggest operator of many offices, which what you would call today co-working spaces. So we had many floors of co-working space or many offices, very successful business. And we also had something called presidential executive travel apartments, which were travel apartments for busy executives. It was kind of Airbnb before there was Airbnb, but it wasn't short term. It was all 1, 2, and 3 month rentals, but still relatively short, right? Medium term rental. So we were going under the market with presidential executive travel apartments, mini offices. We owned a mini storage business. You know what that is? You know, those places where you open the garage door, you throw your stuff in and close it again. So we went under the market, but we also wanted to do something else. So what we decided to do was to buy 600 acres of rural land in the west end of Ottawa and apply for a National Hockey League expansion franchise. And the idea was, it was very simple. And Cyril Leader, who worked with me for 40 years, he's the president and CEO of the Ottawa Senators today. Cyril Leader had a very important observation. He said, Bruce, every time we do a project, whether it's a shopping mall, a plaza, a subdivision, an office building, an industrial condo building, every time we do a project, the land around us goes up in value. So he said, why don't we buy more land than we need for the new stadium or arena, which we called at the time Palladium, now is Canadian Tire Center. Why don't we buy 600 acres of land instead of 100 acres? We only needed 100 acres for the building, but 500 acres would be left over. And that presumably would go up in value, and then we could sell that if we wanted to. And that turned out to be a very good idea on Cyril's part, because land values back then, we were buying land. We bought 600 acres for about $7.2 million, which works
Oh
out
my
to
God.
about $12,000 an acre. And today it sells for over $1 million an acre. So you can see that his idea was a pretty good one.
That's an amazing story. And I was part of watching this. I was younger back then, but I was a hockey fan first and foremost,
Are
not
you
in
old
real
enough
estate,
for that?
watching this adventure.
Okay.
Unbelievable. And just recently watching the Alexander Daigle Prime
Yeah,
um, episode as well, just reminded me of all these memories and souvenirs from 91, 92. It was amazing.
it was
And
fun.
you know, I listened to a lot of your interventions on real estate, and I always found you had a different philosophy in regards to being an actual agent.
Yeah.
You always went back to offering your client opportunities to see things differently, as opposed to selling a property, for example, teaching them how to refinance, reinvest, and
Yeah.
grow a business, as opposed to buying, selling. Tell me a little bit about this. Do you do still a lot of coaching, and how? What's your philosophy on this? And is that
Yeah.
still part of a big business for you?
So I know it's kind of corny, and maybe some people wouldn't agree with me, but I think realtors are actually in the helping business. You know, we're not psychiatrists, we're not psychologists, we're not doctors or paramedics, we're not firefighters. But I think, I do really think that realtors play an important role. And I don't have to tell you, Sebastian, but I'll bet you if I'm involved in 30 real estate transactions for clients of mine, probably 29 out of those 30 wouldn't get resolved, wouldn't close without the participation of the realtors. And I know that seems very self-serving because I am a realtor as well, and so are you, but I mean it. I remember I helped one of my tech clients sell his office building. He had I think it was about a 10,000 square foot office building, and he wanted to buy another one, which was 30,000 square feet. And we sold his 10,000 square foot office building to another tech company. 2 days before completion, the owner of one tech company is on this phone, and the owner of the other, buyer and seller, like kind of like this with me, and they say, I can't say it on your podcast, they were a few four-letter words from both of them saying there's no effing way we're closing this deal. They were arguing over two television screens, whether they were attached to the wall and whether they were chattels or fixtures. And then there was, I think, a whiteboard. You can see I have a whiteboard behind me. And so they were arguing over this is a multi-million-dollar transaction. They were arguing over maybe $3,000 worth of, was it a chattel or a fixture? And it wasn't 100% clear in the agreement which was which. And so you've had, many of your realtors, probably all of them, have had experience with like this. And so you have to talk your clients off the ledge. But in terms of a helping profession, let me give you another example. An older lady came to me, Sebastian, and she asked me to list her small plaza for sale. And I looked at it. It was a very nice plaza, and there's a lot of demand for retail plazas in this region. And I said, "Oh, we can absolutely sell it." And she asked me what I thought the list price would be, and I said in the low millions. And she said, "Well, yes," but I said, "I don't think you should sell it." And she says, "What? I don't think you should sell it." And she had a couple of other realtors or brokers, in her home, and they were all pitching her, choose me. I work for this big company. I'm better than everybody else. It was kind of like a beauty contest, the bathing suit contest. I don't look very good in a bathing suit, but anyway. So she said, "What kind of a realtor are you? You're the worst realtor ever, Bruce. Because what I want to sell it, I'm getting older. I want to put the cash in my jeans." And I said to her, "How much money do you make?" There was no mortgage on this. "How much money do you make every year from this plaza?" And she was making about $350,000 from the plaza after paying all of her bills. So that was her net operating income. And there was no mortgage. So she had family income from this plaza, and it didn't have many leases, so it wasn't too complicated to manage. So we should make it 350. I said, "No, if we sell this plaza for $4 million and you pay a little bit of capital gains tax, you get 3.5 million. Back then, interest rates were about 2%. They're higher today. But I said, if you take that $3.5 million and you invest it at 2%, you'll get $70,000 a year. I'm struggling to understand why $70,000 a year is better than $350,000 a year." And she said, "I never thought of it like that. So you really are a terrible real estate broker because you're not getting a listing because I'm not going to sell it." I said, "That's good news." I said, "But there is something else I'd like you to do." She said, "What is that?" "I'd like you to refinance it, 50% loan to value, take out $2 million in tax-free cash because the interest rates were ridiculously low. And out of your $2 million, I want you and your husband," they were quite elderly, "to take $100,000 of that, Sebastian, and go on a worldwide trip and don't come back until you spent every dollar." Because they had been hardworking, they'd never had a holiday. I said, "Just take $100,000 and blow it." And she laughed, and her husband was there. And then with the other $1.9 million, let's go out and buy 15 bungalows and add basement apartments so we can duplex it. So you'll now have a portfolio that has this very nice little mall, and you'll have 10 or 15 residential properties that are duplexed, and you'll have a bigger portfolio and more to hand on to your daughter and her three sons who were also there." And you can imagine the daughter was doing this and her boys were doing that, and that's what we did.
That's amazing. And the first time you told me about that philosophy was about 6 years ago.
That was
And
wild.
I've been applying since, Bruce, and I have to
Oh, good for
say,
you.
about 1 out of 5 presentations on the commercial side that I've done, I've
Oh,
recommended to my clients to not sell because it was not profitable in the
no,
medium to long term. So I adopted that philosophy, and my clientele exploded at some point because they realized that I was there for their
yeah.
interests, not just for
Well,
transactional purposes, right?
you couldn't have said it any better, Sebastian. If you look at a client as a transaction, then obviously the best thing for me to do would have been to do the bathing suit contest. Say, yes, I'm really good at this. I'll sell it for $4 million. I'll get a 4% fee on that. You'll get some money. You'll pay some capital gains taxes. You'll have a bunch of cash, and best of luck. And I'll never see that lady again or her family. But if you become sort of their lifetime real estate advisor, then I mean, the buying opportunities, the commissions that my team got from I think we ended up with 14 or 15 properties that we purchased for her. I mean, the commissions were fantastic, and then of course everybody talks, so she has a lot of rich friends. She talks to them, and then the next thing you know, you're pretty busy. We had one dentist come to see us. He was doing very well. He was in his 40s. He loves real estate, and he was good friends with her grandson, and he came to see us, and he wanted to buy some townhouses in Ottawa, Vancouver, and Toronto. And he ended up buying through us, or through our group, 307 townhouses over the next 6 years. So if you treat your clients as human beings, obviously, and as lifetime at your position as a lifetime advisor, you will, I think, always be busy.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, because it's a true fact and it happens. Now, one technical thing you also discussed with me probably 5 or 6 years ago, and this is more real estate routine, but dual representation.
Yeah,
Remember us having this conversation, and back then, I believe BC and another province had implemented a non-dual representation law. In Quebec, it was still wide open.
yeah.
In 2022, they finally cracked down in Quebec. So now we have survived that storm of having to adapt. I must say, you have an incredible crystal ball
Thank you.
because you've predicted this years before it happened. And I want your general comments and philosophy on this. We're just adapting through this right now in Quebec. I know other provinces will follow. Some have already been in it for 3, 4 years, but it's difficult to adapt because the thinking was always I plan to sign if I represent and that double dip on the commission. So it created all kinds of situations where we were in an apparent conflict of interest consistently. So give me your opinion on this today.
So, well, I was glad to hear that Quebec was moving in that direction, and I hope Ontario and other provinces and states will follow. If God forbid you or I were ever accused of a crime, would you want the Crown Attorney or the prosecuting attorney in the states to represent you as well as the Crown or the federal government or state government? Absolutely not. You'll go to jail forever. So I always thought when I got into the realtor practice about 11 years ago now. I thought that was really strange that you could be on both sides of a transaction. And that's not to say that I've never done it, that would be untrue, but I strongly encourage people to get their own representation. So if I'm the listing side and somebody calls me, I say, do you have a realtor? No. Well, maybe you should get one. And I'll give you an example of an early example. One of my clients it was in one of the recessions that we had. Maybe I think it was 2008, 2009. He's a wealthy guy, owns a chain of restaurants, and there was a lot of buying opportunities in that recession. And there was this beautiful $2.5 million house, which in Ottawa is a lot of money, right? I mean, in Toronto, it's not that much, but in Ottawa, that's quite the thing. And he wanted to put it in an offer on it. So we put in an offer. They were asking 2.5 million. He put in an offer of $865,000, which I helped him with. And it was a for sale by owner. And so I went to the owner, and he was a construction guy who was in some financial difficulties. I gave him the offer. And I said, you really should have a realtor representing you. I don't represent you. Okay. The documents say, I represent the buyer, not you. He said, well, I can represent myself. I said, well, maybe what you should do is hire a lawyer. He said, I'm not paying a damn lawyer any money. I'll do it. I'll read it myself. I said, really? Okay. So he read it, and eventually my client bought that property for $870,000. He stole it, right? The guy needed the money. 2 weeks before closing, Sebastian, I get a call from this guy's lawyer. My client is not going to close. I said, why is that? And he said, well, you cheated him. You included all kinds of chattels in the deal. And for example, he had a $300,000 sound system. I put that in as a chattel. That was included, not excluded, included. And he said, you not only stole the property, you stole all his stuff. He has a tractor and he had all kinds of other things.
Yeah.
So I said to the lawyer, well, wait a second here. After the call is over, I'm going to send you all the emails I wrote your guy saying you should get your own representation. You should get a realtor. You should get a lawyer. And you read that. And here's what's going to happen. In 2 weeks from now, my client and his lawyer will serve you with all the documents for closing. If you don't close, then my guy will register his agreement of purchase and sale on title. And this guy's never going to sell to anyone else other than my client. I don't care if it takes 5 years, So either he takes the money or he doesn't. It's up to you. The guy was confused as to what was a chattel, what was a fixture, what was included, what was excluded, even though the agreement was very clear. So they did close, and my guy did get it. So right from that moment on, I thought, A, people should not represent themselves, and B, I don't think we should be in multiple rep because of exactly that kind of situation.
It puts you in a squeeze as a realtor because you think you're doing the right thing by having them sign waivers and forms, but still, it's a very emotional
Very,
moment.
yeah,
Buying is extremely emotional. Selling is a bit more rational, but still, people do get in the emotion of the
yeah,
moment, and
very, very,
it's
very
it's so
emotional.
easy to misinterpret one clause in a contract. I mean,
Yeah.
so good thing you closed that one. I was involved in a few of those as well, and it's
I'm
always
sure.
sad to have to take the legal route to close, but try to avoid that. And I think that not representing both ends will actually resolve that eventually. I think
I
there's
think
still a bit
so.
of a gray area and some loopholes in the way they are implementing it because it's so new to us. But eventually, I think that this is moving in the right direction. Um, so I have a different question now for you. You're an award-winning realtor. You've been with C21 before. You're still a realtor today. Um, I want to know what kind of value you see in brands in general, because all brands are fighting for territory. We're recruiting heavily, we're soliciting agents, and we
Yeah,
want
yeah,
more signings, more market share. How do you see the value of brands in 2024 and moving forward? For
yeah,
example, Royal LePage, C21,
yeah.
Remax. What's your position on that?
So the Century 21 brand is a very powerful brand. It is by far the biggest brand in China. I have clients in Beijing and Shanghai and elsewhere, and so I do some coaching. And Century 21 is huge in China, right? The Century 21 brand, the Remax brand, the Royal LePage brand are very well respected. And Sebastian, this is the most brand conscious generation ever.
Okay.
When I was teaching in Stockholm, I taught digital data strategy to, I think, the top 64 digital data scientists in Sweden. And this was at Hyper Island Institute. And when I got there, my first day when I was lecturing to them, I asked them to get their laptops out, and they did. And I burst out laughing. And because out of the 64 students in the class, 63 of them had MacBook Pros. That Apple logo was staring at me, right? And
Yeah,
and I
that's right.
burst out laughing, and one of the young women in the class said, "Professor, what's so funny?" And I said, "Come on up here and turn around. What do you see?" She said, "I see a bunch of students. What else do you see?" And 63 out of 64 of those students had had these MacBook Pros, which back then cost like 3,500 euros, which is quite a lot. And there's one kid in the class, a Russian kid, who didn't. And I said to him, I said, "Why don't you have a MacBook Pro?" And then he said in his heavy Russian accent, "I build own computer for 1,000 euro max, better than everybody else." And I laughed at that, and the whole class laughed. And I said, you know, look, Apple has good computers. There's no doubt about it. But to some extent, this student is right. Um, you know, the difference between 1,000 euros and 3,500 euros is a hell of a lot. Really, are they 2,500 euros better? No, they are not. They're very good, but they're not that much better. What is better is their branding. And Century 21 and Royal LePage and Remax have a very powerful brand. So I know a lot of realtors are getting pinched by other brokerages, and that's fine. They can do whatever they want. But you should, as a young realtor or more senior, you should consider the brand because, you know, let's say again, Sebastian, you and I had a sandwich shop and we made the best sandwiches in the world, like fabulous and good price, good value, nutritious sandwiches. And it was called the Sebastian and Bruce Sandwich Shop. 1,000 people, 10,000 people would go by our shop every day, go 2 blocks further to go to Subway. The only difference is Subway has a bigger, better known brand than we do. Branding is incredibly important, and I would caution everybody to give that some considerable thought as they're staking their careers on something that might not work for them.
You know, I certainly appreciate that because I started with an independent franchisee when I was a first rookie in 2010 and
Mm-hmm.
quickly realized that whatever efforts I made were counteracted by the fact that my brokerage firm was not seen anywhere and
Yeah.
not known anywhere. So, for example, I lived in Gatineau, French
Mm-hmm.
community. I would
Yeah.
cross the bridge 5 minutes down the road, and nobody would know what that company did. So they thought I was making house plans or designing architectural plan because it was called Maison, some 3D design, whatever. But then I realized that I was limited in my ability to be exposed and get exposure and market
Yeah.
myself. So I found that difficult. So I always tell new agents, find your colors, find the
Yeah.
right vehicle for you because I find that all brands have strengths and weaknesses, but find the right one for you. But what you don't want to do is not be able to brand yourself. And that
Yeah.
was always my position on that. So I'm glad you shared that with us. Um, Last quick question on real estate. What would be your one piece of advice? It's very difficult to start in real estate today. For a new
Yeah.
agent, there's so many options, so many obstacles. Everything is so expensive. I mean, you can't
Mm.
get very far with a small budget. What would be your piece of advice to a new agent starting tomorrow morning?
Yeah, so I think it's very important, as I said earlier in this podcast, to specialize and provide differentiated value. So lots of young agents come and talk to me, and I say, "What do you want to do?" And most of them think, "Well, I guess I'll sell houses." Okay. Because, you know, I don't know what real estate education is like today, but it's pretty heavily focused on, you know, selling a house. And, you know, a lot of young people, they hear, oh, I sell a $1 million house and I get a 5% commission. Of course, it's not shared with anyone else. I'll make $50,000. I sell 4 of those a year. I make it 200 grand. They were a server in a restaurant. They were selling used cars. You know, they were making $45,000 a year. They'll sell 4 houses a year. They'll make 200 grand. Then they get into the profession and find out, wait a second, there's a lot of very good looking young people between 25 and 40 years of age, male and female, who have the local market absolutely covered off. And breaking into it, what, you're going to go knock on doors and say, my name is Bill or Mary or, you know, Pascal, and, and, um, and compete with people who've been in the business 10 or 15 years and are, you know, handsome young men and good-looking young women. It's very difficult. So I'm not really keen on that model. So what I advise a lot of young people to do is to look at all the different types of property there are. You could become a specialist in farmland, in selling farms, cottages, recreation property, investment property, industrial condos. Most young realtors have never heard that there's a condo called an industrial condo, not just a residential condo. You could become a condo specialist. I mean, there's a lot of different types of real estate that you could practice. And then what I caution or advise a lot of young people to do, and some not so young people to do, is go and work with an established broker like Sebastian or Bruce or any others in an area that you like. So that if, there's always people doing tenant rep and office leasing or industrial leasing or retail leasing. There's a million different brokers out there. Find one, or realtors out there that you like and trust, and he or she, they need you to be the buyer rep. Because being a buyer rep is a pain in the neck when you get a little bit older. I'm 72 now. So, do I really want to show a client, 20 different houses or 20 different office spaces or 20 different industrial spaces? No, I don't. I got young people who do that, and they do, they go show them, and then I help out with the offers and offer to lease, offer to purchase, whatever. But they do all the running around. They earn, I think 50% commissions for that, and they like doing it, and that gets them going, and they start to build their own business, and maybe they only work with the established broker for 5 years, but that'll get you going a lot faster than trying it on your own.
Appreciate that. And on this note, I would like to move on now to a rapid fire questions, if
Uh-oh.
you will.
I
Are
don't think
you
I'm
ready?
very good at this.
I think you're awesome. And for this, I will actually put my
Oh,
Ottawa Sens hat
you made
because
my
this is like
day.
overtime. Overtime. You ready?
Overtime, all right. Hey,
Quick
did you see
answers.
that the Oilers won in overtime last night?
I fell asleep on that one. I'm sorry, Bruce.
I
Did they
I was
win?
awake. I saw it.
I actually missed it. Listen, easy one to start. Double representation in commercial real estate. Yes or no?
No,
Moving the Ottawa Senators from Canada to downtown Ottawa. Yes or no?
yes,
Interest rates, will they drop in July?
no,
That's sad news. Will Gary Bettman ever allow bringing back the Quebec Nordiques in the NHL?
I can't comment on that.
No comment. Are we ever going to see a super inflation period like we've seen since COVID in real estate ever again in our lifetime?
No,
For or against a 3-on-3 overtime and shootouts in NHL hockey?
more.
Would you consider C21 to be one of the best brands in the world today?
I already answered that. Yes,
And will Bruce ever consider retiring one day?
I plan to retire 5 years after I die.
A true realtor spoken.
That's it.
Well, Bruce, many thanks. Again, I want to ask everyone if they want Bruce's amazing book, Don't Back Down, which is a mix of hockey, pro sports negotiations, and real estate, will be made available to you. We'll make the link available. I appreciate your time. This was very rewarding, and we'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Merci bien.
À bientôt.